draw you back to the straw poll results from turn. I mean, there was thousands upon thousands of people clearly stood with Israel, clearly believe radical Islam is the top issue facing the United States. So the debate happening on the stage was one thing. There really wasn't that much of a debate in the crowd. I think some of the Civil War talk is a bit of a mirage when you actually look at the results of the polling among the people in the stands.
Well, I mean, do you think that saying radical Islam is the greatest threat automatically means support for Israel? I mean, because like there is like this white Christian nationalism situation also that is where some of this anti-Semitism comes out of.
In today's video, CNN host Kinsey Wolanski absolutely destroys Scott Jennings on the arena. What this whole conversation is about is the conservative movement acting like anti-Semitism is this complicated issue when it's coming from inside the house. Because let's be real, it's not complicated. It's only complicated when certain influencers bring big audiences and big money. That's when suddenly it turns into, well, I don't agree with everything they say, and we need more nuance, and we can't police speech, even though these are the same people who constantly scream about protecting America and moral values. So let's dive in and watch how Kinsey Wolanski shuts down Scott Jennings on the arena.
This video of Charlie Kirk addressing these kinds of issues in some of his events, and he specifically and explicitly stated, I'm not going to be associated with Jew hatred. He would face these questions about anti-Jewish conspiracy theories, and he was clear every single time. And so I think what Ben is responding to and talking about are these
So why is Tucker on stage at Turning Points USA now?
Look, he's had a long-standing relationship with the organization. I don't speak for them, but all I can tell you is that what Charlie Kirk stood for was that he said, I'm not going to be associated with Jew hatred, period. And when he talks about Nick Fuentes and Candace and others trafficking in these conspiracy theories, I think Ben is doing it in the spirit of Charlie, who was very clear on this matter.
Well, it does seem to me an all eyes on J.D. Vance situation and Marco Rubio and Donald Trump, frankly. If the elected leaders, the self-proclaimed, leaders of the MAGA movement are willing to tolerate the platforming of an avowed Hitler apologist in Nick Fuentes, I mean, that seems to me like where the pressure should be. I certainly agree with Scott that Ben Shapiro and others who are calling out the anti-Semitism, the conspiracy theories of the likes of Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, frankly, Megyn Kelly as well. I think that is an important and good thing for them to be doing. But ultimately, this flows up to, what are the elected leaders of the MAGA movement willing to tolerate? And J.D. Vance, to me, he really failed this moral moment. He failed in this moral moment. He had the opportunity to say, I disavow this. He has said that in the past, by the way. He has said he disavows Nick Fuentes. This was clearly a stage where that was called for, and he did not do it. And that, I think, he is going to have to continue to answer for.
Well, and to this side of the table, if we're focusing in on J.D. Vance, it is worth noting that he gave another interview around this speech. Now, he did not say this from the stage, but this is what he said to Unheard, this outlet. Quote, let me be clear. Anyone who attacks my wife, whether their name is Jen Psaki, she's, of course, the former Biden press secretary, now MS Now host, or Nick Fuentes, can eat SHIT. That is my official policy as the vice president of the United States. So he's willing to say that in this forum, but not on that stage.
Yeah.
To me, this is a really interesting view into the people that are following in Trump's wake. So many of them have defined themselves by jettisoning whatever policies and beliefs they had before and just glomming onto what Trump says. Now Trump's off the stage and they have to think for themselves again. You're in a position where J.D. Vance is in this spot and has really no background to draw on. How did he get to where he is? Just by agreeing with Trump. Trump's gone. All he can do is sort of invoke Donald Trump's name but not make any of his own decisions. It shows you how thin the bench is and how unprepared they are for a moment without Trump.
What I find fascinating is that the idea of a civil war in any political movement isn't anything new, particularly as you approach midterms halfway through a presidential administration. That's usually the party that's out of power. And I think part of what's driving this is the singularity of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. And this was sort of inevitable, this moment. Now it's painful to watch that in part it deals with anti-Semitism and whether people are willing to push it aside. But at its core, it's sort of the natural political.
What's so wild about this whole exchange is that it basically exposes the biggest contradiction in the MAGA world right now. They say they have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism, but their actions keep showing that tolerance is negotiable depending on who's bringing the clicks and the crowd. Because look, it's easy to say I condemn Jew hatred in a vacuum. Almost everybody will say that on camera. The real test is whether you're willing to shut the door on the people who keep smuggling that stuff into the movement under the label of just asking questions. And that's where the leadership failure comes in, and why Kate and Elliot's point hits so hard. If elected officials won't draw a bright line, then the extremists don't hear you're not welcome. They hear you're useful. And here's the thing, this isn't theoretical. Anti-Semitic conspiracies aren't just offensive, they're historically dangerous. They're the kind of narratives that have been used for centuries to justify scapegoating, violence, and political repression. And we've already seen in the last few years how online radicalization jumps into the real world fast. When you let figures like Fuentes hang around the edges, you normalize the pipeline that takes people from ironic trolling to full-blown hate politics. What also stands out is how selective the outrage can be. Some conservative leaders suddenly find their backbone when anti-Semitism starts hitting their side directly, but they'll shrug when it's Islamophobia, racism, anti-immigrant hysteria, or attacks on LGBTQ people. That's not principle, that's self-preservation. And JD Vance is kind of the perfect example of the bigger issue. A lot of these newer MAGA leaders don't really have an independent moral compass. They're trained to read the room, protect the brand, and avoid upsetting the loudest parts of the base. But leadership is literally the opposite of that. Leadership is drawing the line even when it costs you something.
I think it's also worth considering that for the Tucker Carlsons, the Megyn Kellys of the world, they are trying to build followers, they are trying to make money. And so there is a divergence of interests in terms of, conflict cells, and whether the Megyn Kellys and Tucker Carlsons of the world, whether, again, MAGA and the people who are running for office, asking to represent the American people, are willing to tolerate having these people who are fundamentally out to, to make money, often to shock, often to create conflict. Are they going to be allowed to speak for the MAGA movement? I think that the elected officials who want to represent Americans across the country need to say with a clear voice that we don't tolerate this. This is not the kind of language that we're going to tolerate in our party.
I don't disagree with you. I think ultimately it'll be up to the nominee of the party, most likely J.D. Vance, to basically say who's in my group and who's out, and to separate himself from people who are trafficking in hate and conspiracy theories. I would just draw you back to the straw poll results from turn. I mean, there was thousands upon thousands of people clearly stood with Israel, clearly believe radical Islam is the top issue facing the United States. So the debate happening on the stage was one thing. There really wasn't that much of a debate in the crowd. I think some of the Civil War talk is a bit of a mirage when you actually look at the results of the polling among the people in the stands.
Well, I mean, do you think that saying radical Islam is the greatest threat automatically means support for Israel? I mean, because
they're the ones fighting them.
There is this white Christian nationalism situation also that is where some of this anti-Semitism comes out of.
Well, look, Tucker was on the stage attacking Republicans who were up there saying, we have to worry about radical Islam. I mean, he was kind of defending it up there. That wasn't where the crowd was at all. And so I think some of the people who are dabbling in some of these things that I think are wrong, they don't have as much support among the people in that crowd as they think they do. Now, I think you might be right that they see benefit to it in growing an online audience. But in that arena, I think that arena is much more where Charlie was, much more where Ben is than where some of these conspiracy provocateurs
What jumps out to me in this debate is that it's not just a disagreement about politics, it's a fight over who gets to define what the modern right actually is. Elected officials who have to answer to voters, or media personalities who answer to engagement metrics and merch sales. Because the incentive structure is totally different. A politician at least has to pretend they're governing for everyone. But the Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly ecosystem is built around keeping people angry, anxious, and addicted to the next outrage hit. And the easiest way to do that is to flirt with conspiracy, flirt with scapegoats, and flirt with just asking questions rhetoric that conveniently overlaps with the same old anti-Semitic tropes. Even when they don't say it outright, they'll boost the people who do. Because it drives clicks. And Scott's defense here: look at the straw poll, the crowd is pro-Israel, the civil war is a mirage, kind of misses how this stuff actually works. You can have a crowd that says it supports Israel and still have anti-Semitism baked into the movement through other channels. Historically, some of the loudest pro-Israel factions in American politics aren't motivated by respect for Jewish people at all. They're motivated by end times theology or geopolitical symbolism. That's not solidarity. That's using Israel as a prop while letting Jewish communities deal with the blowback of rising conspiracy culture at home. Plus, the radical Islam is the top threat framing isn't neutral. It's been one of the biggest gateways into broader bigotry. When you build your identity around fear of Muslims, it becomes way easier for bad actors to redirect that paranoia toward globalist elites, shadow financiers, or dual loyalty insinuations. That pipeline is real, and we've seen it accelerate online in the last decade. So even if the average person in the crowd isn't showing up thinking, I'm here for anti-Semitism, the movement still has a leadership problem if it keeps platforming people who normalize that poison. The real test isn't what the crowd checks on a straw poll, it's whether the party has the spine to stop letting grifters and extremists set the tone.
Quick, because really interesting point that Kristen Soltis Anderson just made in the chat, this idea of whether this very fight is mostly of interest to conservative voters, or if median voters actually care about it, or there's a particular interest to it. It would seem like this is a family feud happening that one segment of the population really cares about, but I'd be curious to hear how.
Well, I think that there's also, I think it's an important big picture question about whether the base of one of the major parties in our country is going to tolerate anti-Semitism coming from its stages, regardless of what breaks through.
To be fair, if you're going to make that comment, we have once invoked the Democratic Party or what's going on the left right now, and if you're talking about anti-Semitism,
we can absolutely.
I mean,
we are not afraid to talk about that
compared
from
to them.
the left either.
But
Scott, and you know that about me and this show.
I know. I'm just saying.
We are not afraid of doing
that. I'm just saying.
No, but if the names were changed and it were, pick the MoveOn.org conference, and there was still the same sort of debate happening over anti-Semitism, we all ought to be calling it out. And I think we're in agreement about that.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, Scott has called it out.
No, I'm not saying I did not say
Anybody who apologizes for Hitler, we should call out. I'm willing to make that blanket
I think we're in agreement. There's anti-Semitism on all sides, and it's really bad, and we want to stamp it out of American political debates. Full stop.
Yes, full stop. All right, coming up next here in the arena,
What I liked about this exchange is that Kinsey and Elliot are basically doing the thing that actually matters in moments like this. They're treating anti-Semitism as a real-world threat, not just another partisan talking point to volley back and forth. Because here's the truth, it's not just online drama. When a major political movement keeps flirting with conspiracies that have the exact same DNA as classic anti-Semitic propaganda, you don't have to literally say Jews for it to function the same way. The whole shadowy global elites, secret cabals, puppet masters controlling banks' media, traitors with dual loyalty routine is historically the gateway drug to anti-Semitism. That's not a rhetorical opinion. That's literally how these narratives have moved for over a century, from the protocols era stuff to modern Telegram Twitter rebrands. And the median voters don't care argument only works if you assume the consequences stay contained inside the arena. They don't. When politicians and major platforms normalize extremist language, it bleeds into real life. Harassment spikes, vandalism spikes, threats spike. We've seen it with synagogues, Jewish schools, even random people getting targeted because someone decided they look Jewish. The FBI and civil rights groups have been warning for years that conspiracy-driven radicalization is one of the most consistent drivers of hate incidents. It's not theoretical. Also, Scott trying to pivot to what about the left is exactly why people are exhausted. Yes, anti-Semitism exists across the spectrum, absolutely, but that doesn't excuse the right from cleaning its own house, especially when the issue being debated is who gets welcomed onto conservative stages. That's a choice. Nobody is forcing anyone to platform Hitler apologists or people who wink at Holocaust denial or influencers who launder hatred through just asking questions. So I'm with Kinsey and Elliot here. If we're serious about stamping this out, the standard can't be, well, the other side is worse. The standard has to be, if you're excusing Hitler, spreading anti-Semitic conspiracies, or targeting Jews as a group, you're out. No speeches, no panels, no normalization, full stop. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing, and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.